So Kathy, I don't even know where to begin. I love this diagram. I mean, this is amazing. When and why did you decide to compile it? What was like your motivation to sit down and just think so holistically about not only your career, your life, right, and how it all blends?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ruben. This actually, I have to give credit to HP. It was the company that I joined right out of business school, and we were all mapping our journeys. And the whole notion, if you look at this slide, you see the line. Everything above the line is what we call the life part of your journey. So family and volunteer and everything below the line is your work part of your journey. And when you do a map like this, now obviously mine's been filled out because I've been working for a very long time. You do, and I'm so pleased, you do want to see that it is balanced, right? If you're all down below, that means you're all work and no play. And if it's all above, then you're having a great time, which is awesome. But looking across a span of a career, and I'm towards, the latter part of the career, I'm so pleased that I've been able to experience what I've been able to experience in my journey.
Was it cathartic in some ways? What came up for you when you were compiling this?
I think there are several observations, and that, you can see that, the starting out, there's a lot of questions, and you don't see obviously much on the work side, but just how to navigate finding a life partner and children, what to do with the career during that time. And if you notice, during the time I was having children, Kevin, Grant, Derek, and Lance, you don't see as many things on the life experience because it's all about the kids.
Right.
And you notice later in career when the kids are grown, all of a sudden what sprouts up are all of these other activities that non-work that were fascinating experiences for me, but also I would say enhanced my work experience. And then, on the work side, it's what sort of different companies, have we worked in different roles. And so that's really what popped out for me. And one thing that I will say is everyone's journey is different. Everyone goes through different ebbs and flows. But in the end, you want to say, did I end up where I really wanted to end up? And the answer is yes, for me.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because what I love about your journey is that it didn't have like a formula to it, right? I mean, it was a lot of like, what comes up for me is the word best next step, an opportunity to present itself. And a lot of times, the other word that's coming up for me, Kathy, is going against the grain, right? Like, what are you doing? You're going from VP to individual contributor. So why don't we talk about like some of these mountaintops? It seemed like you would hit a mountaintop of being like a VP, for example, and then you go down into a valley of being an individual contributor, and then you go up to a higher mountain. So like these mountain peak to mountain peak. Why don't you walk our audience through a couple of those, some of the most memorable transitions, right? That kind of went against the grain, and can be a little bit scary maybe. I mean, there was a big risk involved.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we do it chronologically?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll start off with me being, I would say, a girl in STEM. Okay, so there's a little bit of a mountain peak right there in the sense that I moved around a lot. So by the time I was 14, I was a sophomore in high school. I had lived in 7 different places. So I really didn't have a lot of friends, and, socially it was a little bit awkward. But one thing that I really learned was that I was really good at math and science, especially math. I loved math.
Wow.
And I remember, getting that wonderful note to go to Stanford and majored in mechanical engineering. And there were not very many women. And so already it was looking around, right, looking to the left, there were probably about over 100 graduates, and maybe 20, probably less than 20 were women. And always being in an environment where you were different, right, was a little bit of a difficult situation. And I remember learning at that time, what should I do? Should I be someone who's very technical? I realized that I loved being with people, and just deciding what I should end up doing was difficult for me. So that's why I ended up going to business school, because I realized and I learned at that point, even though I wanted to be in high tech, I wanted to lead people. And I remember that very first job that I had, it's the first manager role at HP in the medical products group. It was a very difficult situation there, where here I was, graduated from Harvard Business School, and I was ready to change the world, and
Right.
I become a production line supervisor. It's for the ultrasound transducer manufacturing line for the cardiac imaging equipment that we had at HP. We were in the medical device business at that time. Being the youngest person there, knowing nothing, everyone, the closest in age was maybe 10 years older, 10 to 30 years older. And I had to go in that line and manage these folks who didn't want to talk to me. Who is this young person trying to lead?
Yeah.
And long story short, the notion was, well, I'm never going to be as good as they are in physically manufacturing this very complex transducer. But what will I bring to them? I will bring breaking down silos, understanding how the whole system works, remove bottlenecks to improve productivity. And so, what could have been a very difficult confidence setback of them not listening to me or wanting to know or cooperate to make things better, it was just perseverance to climb that mountain. And it's funny, we started off as the lowest productivity manufacturing line on the site. And within a year and a little bit, we ended up being the highest productivity. So
I love that. It reminds me a little bit of the military. You're like a second lieutenant coming in and you're dealing with like these non-commissioned officers, these sergeants and sergeant majors who have been there for 15 to 20 years, and you're their boss, right? But they have all this experience. When did you realize that you had won their respect? Was there like a defining moment when you realized, okay, we're really beginning to click, we found the groove?
Yeah, great question. I think there was. And what I said, it's one thing you got to walk a mile in their shoes. So what I did is I went through the manufacturing line. I did the wiring. I did the potting to make sure that the transducer head was made well. I did the cabling. I did the testing. And I went through that entire process to see what was working, what was not working. And we did uncover a bottleneck in front of the potting station where we had to glue everything together. And the other thing I did was we sat around and I got to learn about them as individuals. And I think slowly, I started to gain their trust. And by just spending that time and listening, I realized that, wow, I was making their lives easier, and they realized that. And boy, that turned out to be a very defining moment in my career.
It sounds like it because you came into that situation with academic confidence, right? Stanford, Harvard, you had the academic confidence. And now it sounds like over the course of that 1+ year, where you had this amazing result and got to lead this team and really help them raise their game as well, that you also developed maybe some leadership confidence. Is that true? Like you kind of came out very well-rounded from that experience.
You're spot on. And through the School of Hard Knocks, by the way, it's not like I did everything right.
Right.
I mean, we had folks on the line that didn't speak English. That was not their first language. We had people who were, I was 25 at that time. We had people who were in their 50s, just generational gaps and differences, different motivations. Some people, they're just earning a paycheck. Others were trying to get started and maybe make it to another level. And it was just such a study in diversity, real diversity from all walks of life. And it really taught me the value of inclusion well before that word was coined, right? We talk about diversity and inclusion, something that I did, many, many years ago, but it really did cement and build a foundation for me as far as these great leadership qualities about listening and being inclusive and walking a mile in their shoes and treating them the way that I'd like to be treated, that has served me well through my entire career. So let me give you another mountain valley situation, the one that you were referring to.
Yeah, please.
So I was at HP for 9 years, and it was a great experience, more in the supply chain manufacturing arena. And then I left to go to a startup, Penguin Computing, as the vice president of operations. It was like a mini COO role, and that was fabulous as far as so much learning. But long story short, within 8 months, I found that we were already having to let people go. I had to probably let go 2/3 of the organization, which was really, really difficult. But boy, did I learn so much about what real values were, what priorities were. what was happening, we were about to merge with another company, and then the chair of the board was not happy. He let the CEO go, and we all basically marched out of that company. I got picked up very quickly by Linux Networks, which was the company we wanted to have a joint agreement with. But anyway, it was such a fascinating experience. And, you know, you look at the title, and I definitely had the stock certificate wallpaper, right? You get
right,
all these shares, and they just this beautiful wallpaper. So then I had the opportunity to return to HP, and I wanted to make a career shift, because all the way up until this point, it was about manufacturing, operations, supply chain, all of those areas. And I thought, well, I want to get into a new domain. I want to get into strategy. I want to get into sales and go to market. And so I took a role from VP from Linux Networks as an individual contributor on the strategy team. And I remember folks at that time were looking at me and saying, have you lost a few screws in your head? Why are you doing that? You dropped like 4 levels to be an individual contributor. And I said, you know, for me, it's really not about the level. It's about the job content and what I'm going to do. And I know I'm going back to HP, a company that I'm very familiar with. I'm going into a brand new function. At this point, it was strategy, and I ended up doing go-to-market strategy. It was an opportunity for me. In a way, it was a little bit refreshing and almost a little bit of a relief to not manage people for the first time in 10 years. I was an individual contributor, and it allowed me the opportunity to really focus on myself and my craft, and to learn about strategy, and to learn about sales and go to market, and how to build that new structure that we were putting in place. And as you said, it's funny, that's the go slow to go fast. You know, I took that stop out, but I rose to VP within less than 2 years, which was unheard of. Someone coming from individual contributor to VP. And what's interesting is when I returned, people said that it was as if I was a different person. And I think it was because I had the really, really tough experiences of having to let go, you know, half of the organization, about what life was like when you don't make payroll, around understanding what real priorities are and taking risks, and knowing, hey, there's calculated risks and they're really critical risks that could sink the company. And so I was a bolder person. I was a bolder employee, a bolder leader that was able to really look at situations with much more of an eagle eye, and not afraid to say, hey, I'm not sure we're going in the right direction, and here's my reasoning. Not to play it safe and say the right things, right, to preserve my employment, but to really go there and make some really hard decisions or ask key questions. And because of that, I was rewarded with, to me, I thought was a very, very fast rise to VP.
Yeah, what's coming to my mind, you probably came back into HP with like the best of both worlds. You knew how HP functioned, but you'd also had some experiences that you might never have had at HP. And so it was a great combination. What is happening in your personal life at this time? Because you're also juggling, right? You're rising fast. You're going from individual contributor within 2 years to VP, more responsibility, but you're also raising children. You've got a family. You're involved in many different things. How's all this integrating at the time?
Yes. Yeah. Well, let me just talk about the general topic of work-life balance or work-life blend.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, you know, Stanford undergrad, Harvard Business School. I must admit, I graduated with people who were massive achievers, who were hard chargers. And if you look at that early part of the career, you know, for about 10 years there, if you look at my career there, it was a lot of lateral moves. Right. So I went from supply chain, I went to marketing, I went to procurement, and all really not rising. Meanwhile, my peers who were a little bit later on the family front were, oh, I'm director now, I'm senior director, and I'm VP, I'm general manager. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this was another example of a peak in a valley. I actually, in the middle of that, had what I called my midlife crisis at 36, because I had 3 children at that time, and I didn't feel like I was the best mother because I was not home for them. And I looked at my work and I said, well, I'm not rising. I'm still just a an individual contributor doing the best I can, working so many hours and then spending time with the children. I felt like I had no social life and no friends. So it was a very, very difficult time for me then, very much a trough. And I said, well, what is my priority? And I said, I know I went to all this education to make a difference in society, not just with my family, but at work. So I changed my attitude and doubled down saying, how fortunate am I to be able to work and to learn while I'm doing these lateral moves and have a family, and to do that in the best way that I can. So I will not be perfect, but I will do it the best that I can. And I have to feel good about that.
Yeah, but that must be pretty hard, I would imagine, right? Because you're used to achieving, right? And you're used to being like, oh, I'll just throw more effort at it, right? It's not going my way. I'll just throw more effort at it. I'll just grind. Maybe I'm wrong here, but that's kind of what's coming up for me. So it sounds like that's some surrender. Or on some level, you're like,
it was a beautiful word. It was a surrender. I surrendered to the fact that my children and my family during this time were going to be number one.
Okay.
And what was taking a back seat was work. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. So the kids, they were in preschool and daycare, and you had to pick them up at 5 o'clock. If not, you'd be fined. So I would always say I would contract with every new manager, hey, when I'm at work, you're going to get 100%. Maybe 110%. But come 4:45, I need to leave and pick up my children. Okay. If you want to have a meeting at 5 o'clock, I will not be there. And it's setting those boundaries. That's the surrender part. And it's strength in surrender in that sense.
Right.
Setting those boundaries allowed me to get through those childbearing years in that way. And so, when I got to the point, as you said, how was I dealing with the family? I do have some funny, poignant stories. Can I tell you a few stories?
Oh, yeah. We love stories. Yeah, right.
So, as the kids were getting older, there was another trough situation where Kevin, our oldest, there was a very important play that you did in kindergarten. It was called The Three Piggy Opera. It was about the three pigs and the houses and blow your house down. And I missed it. I didn't even know it happened. I was traveling a lot and doing that. And I remember going to school and picking up Kevin, and they said, well, where were you? I said, what do you mean, where was I? You weren't at the Three Piggy Opera where Kevin, had a leading role. I said, I didn't even know he was in it. That was a wake-up call.
Right.
I said, wait a second. That's not right. I am missing out on some very, very keen and critical milestones of my children. That was a wake-up call where I said, okay, I'm not going to do that again. So what I did is I actually started to volunteer at school. And again, this is maybe once every 2 months, but those were meetings on my calendar that I would not miss. Science docent, art docent, that sort of thing. And that's how I was able to blend a difficult story and a funny story. So when I was doing this, the EVP of the Personal Systems Group at HP, we were in Germany. And I was leaving that Thursday to come back in time for Friday so that I could do science docent at school for one of my sons. And he had asked me the day before, hey, we're going to go on to Germany. I'd like you to join me to visit some more customers, but that would mean you'd go home on Saturday. And I remember saying to him, and here's drawing the boundaries, I said, I can't do that. I have to go home because I have to do science docent. Now, I remember flying home thinking, oh my gosh, was that a career limiting
decision? I was going to ask you, like, what was coming up for you? Because that's pretty scary stuff, right?
It's very scary stuff.
Yeah.
Very scary stuff. So here I was, and it's like, well, in the end, I said, if I was to be fired or laid off or demoted because of that, well, so be it, because my family, remember, I learned the lesson. My family was too important. And so that Monday, he calls me into the office, and I'm a little nervous. I'm thinking, pink slip. And the first thing he says to me was, how was science docent? And my heart sank. And I thought, oh, is this good or bad? And then he said, I hope it was good. We did miss you, but I understand your priorities. And then immediately I was like, oh, this is so good. And it cemented such a strong relationship between the two of us.
Right.
Because I was able to set those boundaries. And then one last super funny story. So, and then I got good at it. Okay. So I was leading this SMB strategy, small and mid-sized business strategy for HP, which was with the printers and the PCs and the servers all together, figuring out what we were going to do for that segment of the customer segment. And I had put on my calendar yard duty because I would have the steering committee meeting. I would leave to go do yard duty and I'd come back. Now, I'm not going to tell you what yard duty is because one of the people on the steering committee had the courage to ask me one day, are you going home and gardening and then coming back to work? And I said, no. Yard duty is I have standard volunteer hours where I have to go to school and watch the children during recess because we had, volunteer hours that we had to be at the school. And so I loved the fact that they thought I was so calm and collected that I could go home and garden. But it just really did become a blend. So long story short, to your point, Ruben, is, it was very difficult at first. I really was kind of depressed about the balance, but I chose my priority. And then I learned how to blend it and then fiercely defend it. So like you said, it was like a surrendering, but with strength. And then at some point it was just, I'm leaving because I have to do something with the kids. And now I find in the pandemic, because a lot of young parents are working at home, it's become much more accepted to say, sorry, my child's at home, I can't make this meeting. Totally understand. I wish I'd had that during that time. But, they always say pros and cons of the pandemic. I think it's allowed for companies to be a lot more empathetic about work-life blend.
No, what's coming up for me is you were like a pioneer, right? I mean, you were a pioneer before this was even on the radar, and you decided to stand up for yourself. And I love it. So like surrender is flow. You had an attitude of gratitude. You kind of, it seems like when you got that balance right, it didn't really hurt your career at all. I mean, I'm looking at your chart here, and you go from VP to VP to VP to VP to SVP. I mean, what's coming up for me, you can have it all. It may look a little different. You might have to find your formula, but it doesn't have to be an opportunity cost. And yet in all of that, I know there was one meeting you were telling me about, maybe you can grace us with this story, one meeting that went horribly wrong, right? Wasn't
yes.
there one? Yeah. So because I think it's important that people understand, hey, just because you've got momentum, it doesn't mean that things don't go sideways sometimes. So maybe you can tee up that story for us.
I will. And by the way, when you look at this chart that you see, I've presented this to students, at Santa Clara, at Stanford. And when you see that little yellow bubble about poignant moment, this is the poignant moment I'm about to.
Oh, this is it. Okay.
It's really cemented in my psyche. So this was, again, the personal systems group, and we were at my boss's staff meeting. So again, this was the EVP, the same EVP, by the way, that I had met later and did the boundaries of the work-life balance. But this was one of the first meetings I was ever introduced to, and I had to present a new way of managing what we called our volume customers. Now, what was very interesting at that time is I created a plan. I had my working team with me. I'd shared with my boss what the plan was. I went to, each of did a bit of socialization, and I went and presented it at the staff meeting. So we're sitting there at the staff meeting, and the leader of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, SVP of sales, basically kills the idea, says it's not a good idea, unfounded, disagrees with it. And this is in the middle of this meeting. Wow. And I was dumbfounded. I actually didn't know what to do. And my boss at that time was not in person, was on the phone, and he was silent. So I took the brunt of the force of that negative comment. Yeah. And I remember the EVP saying, stop, we're not talking about this. Again, I need you to leave. I want you to come back in 2 weeks, and we're going to see how this gets resolved. So this was my second pink slip concern. So I remember leaving that meeting with the two team members that I was working with and thinking, wow, it was as if I was taking my final exams all at once and I failed them all. And I felt so low during this, walking out of that meeting.
Did that trigger shame or humiliation? It just seems like such a very...
It was shame. It was humiliation. It was embarrassment. It was looking as if I was unprepared. It just all the things that I really wanted to be. It was the opposite. Right. And not only that, but in the most senior, powerful audience, most influential audience it could be, right? There's the EVP staff. There's this, 2 levels above me. And, and here I was totally blindsided. I thought that I was prepared. So anyway, fine. That's when I learned, by the way, several things that I do now. I said, I'm going to wallow in my sorrow for 24 hours. And that's it. Because you have to give yourself the opportunity to feel bad, right? But I think if you linger too long, you spend all the time worrying and not on the action, right, to get it back on track. But I remember that night, it was a sleepless night I'll never forget. And then I woke up the next morning and I said, okay, as bad as I still continue to feel, I'm going to immerse myself on a get well plan. And so the Get Well plan started with socialization first. Talk to the Americas SVP, talk again to the EMEA SVP, who really had all of these objections. Talk to the Asia Pac SVP, talk to other key stakeholders to understand, what do you want to get out of this? The pros and cons. Iterate, work with my team, iterate on the plan. Check with them the final version before it was presented. You okay with this? You okay with this? You okay with this? 2 weeks later, went back and presented, and it was passed with flying colors.
Yeah, I love that.
This is an example of you can't get to those highest highs without going through very low lows.
Right.
And those low lows, and I've had, like I said, many of them, laying off people, having this embarrassing moment, humiliating moment, actually, in front of my boss's staff. And, but having those kind of, gives you that thick skin to then first be able to get good feedback as you're moving forward, not taking things personally or being defensive. But it also makes you appreciate those highs so much more. And you recognize those highs because you say, wow, I never would have achieved that had I not gone through this experience.
No, I love that, because there's 3 things. Like, 1, you came out better, not bitter, right? You said, okay, I'm going to get better, not bitter. 2, you built these amazing internal constituencies and these internal alliances, right? You went out to each SVP individually, got their feedback, got their buy-in, enrolled them in a vision. So you walked into that meeting in a very different place. And 3, I bet you earned some respect, because that's not the reaction most people have. Like you said, most people get defensive or bitter or upset, or they try to undermine authority and they try to protect their reputation. Did you notice a difference in the level of respect that you received from these leaders by doing that?
100%, because I think that was one of the defining moments which led me to a much faster rise to VP.
Yeah, I can see that. That's like, wow, that's like, you could take a blast like that and come back better. You're one of us. I know it sounds weird. It sounds like some sort of like hazing ritual or something. I don't know, but you passed it. So that's great. Look, I love your story and I love your career. And I know that you've also attained something recently, which is being a member of a board member of a publicly traded company. And that's been something you wanted to attain as well as part of your career. Any final words of wisdom for folks right now trying to navigate work, life, and maybe a more unusual path in these interesting times?
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking that question. I think, first of all, as you look at this is my journey. Everyone will have their own journey. And I think in the end, you have to be satisfied with your journey. And if you're not, do something about it. But everyone's picture is going to look different. Now, one of the things that back way in the beginning, when I was that girl graduating from high school who knew she was good in math, my goal, and these are multiple goals. I wanted to be married. That is true. I wanted to have a boy and a girl, which I didn't have. 4 sons, but that's all good. You don't always get everything you want. I wanted to work in high tech. I wanted to manage a big team, and I've managed teams as large as 1,500 people. The current one is about 200. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to volunteer for organizations that meant a lot to me. So Stanford is one of them, Santa Clara University, Baylor. And I wanted to be on a public board. And I will tell you, getting on the first public board is not easy. And you think about the paths that you take to get there. There is no path. It's not do steps 1, 2, and 3 and you get on one. It's not that at all. You know, I'd worked for VMware for 5 years and then recently joined Nutanix about 6 months ago. And I actually think it was that move to go from VMware to Nutanix that triggered IonQ looking at me. And so I was very happy at VMware. Had I stayed, I'm not sure I would have been looked at, because I was able to get back to a technical role as the SVP of SaaS engineering at Nutanix that probably got the attention of IonQ, which is the first pure play publicly traded quantum computing company in the world. Wow. But if I look through what the key ingredients are for your own success around this, it is truly having, and people always say, what do you want to do in 5 years? What do you want to do in 5 years? For me, it's not what you do in 5 years. It's what do you want to achieve in your career? You should at least set some of those goals. But it's not just what you achieve, it's how you achieve it. Right. So are you sacrificing your family too much for work? You know, are you maybe spending more time with family and not enough with work if you really want to spend more time at work? Are you a values-driven leader? I'm a values-driven leader. You know, there's things, I have 2 mottos about, do what you say you're going to do and treat people the way you want to be treated. And so with those kind of tenets, I've been able to lead what I would call a very fulfilling, busy, and exciting life. And it's my life, right? It might not be exciting for someone else, but I really do feel, you said this, have it all. There's this phrase, I remember being in a meeting where a woman was saying, you cannot have your cake and eat it too as a woman. And I remember hearing that, and it was a bit jarring for me to hear that, because I said, I don't believe in that. I don't subscribe to that. I believe you can have your cake and eat it too. You may take a little smaller slice and you may take a smaller bite, but in your mind, you can live a fulfilling work life, family life, and do it in a values-driven way that leads you to high satisfaction. And in the end, if you're not where you want to be, like I was when I was 36, you either change your attitude, you learn something new, you try something new, but you have a choice. In the end, you have a choice. And so through all the choices that I've made, through all the mountain peaks and the low valleys, I have my unique path that I forged. And I wouldn't give up any of those lows for anything, because it's allowed for me to have my highs and my peaks be so meaningful. So that's a little bit about, how I got to this last wonderful thing that I wanted to be is on my first public board.